me today, guys. You've probably, if you're here, you stumbled into likely the least professional of the craft beer professionals group. My name's Kelly Meyer. I wrote a book over the course of 2019, finishing up in early 2020 about how not to start a fucking brewery based on all the mistakes that I had made from 2012, I guess 2011, kind of up until that time, and even still to this day, still making some mistakes. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to sort of go through what's in the book, some of the high points of each chapter. So that's what essentially I'm going to do now. So there's 10 different mistakes that I called in there. It is important that you realize these are not 10 rules for how you should run a brewery. I don't claim or think that I'm remotely qualified to tell you what you should be doing, but I do think that I'm uniquely qualified to tell you how not to run a fucking brewery. So I appreciate you tuning in, and hopefully we'll learn some things. So again, there's 10 different things. I'm going to spend a few minutes on each, and then my plan is to have 15 minutes of questions at the end. That being said, if you run into some questions early on, let me know. I'll be happy to try to, at least if I don't get them to them during the conference, then I'll do it after. And then I did put my phone number and email in the chat section, so hopefully I can, you guys can actually reach out afterwards. I'm more than happy to answer any questions there then as well. But so the first mistake that I made is to focus on quality over branding. And this is one that I see happen all the time. So we have this idea that the best beer is always going to win in the marketplace. And if you've been paying attention for half a fucking second, you realize that that is not even remotely the case, that some truly garbage beer is out there putting up some pretty impressive numbers, taking market share that you deserve as a guy making great beer, a girl making fantastic ales. These are numbers that you should have, but they're being eaten up by somebody who's got a better, stronger branding program. Obviously more time in the market, but I don't think that's necessarily a fair assessment to what they deserve to necessarily have. So when I first started, I spent a lot of time trying to develop my recipes, to a lesser extent my marketing, but I took off a year, my other job, every single Wednesday, and I brewed this almost the same batch of beer, trying to hone it in from, I ended up going up to 12 Plato, 11 Plato, settling in on 10.75 Plato. I had 4 different varieties of hops that I played with, and I ended up settling on variety hop that was in its early edition, and you're gonna not even taste it. So at the end of the day, I wasted a ton of time and money making beer that I thought was, a slight percentage above what the market had to offer. And then in reality, what I found out with a little time in the industry is if I had just spent the $5,000 that I was not willing to spend on a marketing company to give a cohesive brand to the labels and the packaging, I would have made way more money. So ultimately, I fucked that one up. But, and that's obviously looking back, but one of the most kind of glaring examples is I give the example of a beer I made in 2015. After spending all this time making all these specifically dialed in, trying to hone in recipes, I made a beer where I just added 10% pickle juice to a Berliner Weiss, called it Pickle Fucker as a joke, made 3 gallons of it, put it in the tasting room, thought I'd never make it again. And that beer, with kind of an uglier label, a weird flavor profile, has taken on life of its own. And I go through a lot more detail in the book, but ultimately it went from 60 gallons about a month, usually, is what we would do in 500 milliliter bottles, which was the wrong format. But we did that for years. And then in early 2019, we switched to 12-ounce bottles, which ended up, we did about 30 cases a month. And then by July of that year, we were at 245 cases a month. And last month, we did just over 800 cases. So obviously, the weirdest beer in the package we never did ended up being the most profitable. And I have straightened out the marketing on it. But ultimately, the main reason that happened was changing format and also getting my ass handed to me by another local producer who had marketed it right, did the branding correctly. It doesn't even taste like beer. It tastes like pickle juice, but it's a great example of what not to do. So don't make that mistake. Spend the money and the time on the marketing and find something that's gonna get attention and have a niche to it. So anyways, that's that one. Mistake 2 was start small and build, which It's something that I thought would be kind of cool based on my experience in other industries for one, but just kind of that even being part of a thing where you watch a business grow, you still want to see something that starts small. So I started on that 2-barrel system, 60 gallons, 4 kegs of brew, used that for almost 8 full months before I just finally gave up and I could not fucking deal with it anymore. And I go into detail in the book about all the examples of what exactly was wrong with that system specifically. I won't call the manufacturer out because I know they're still making these things, but essentially what you're talking about here is a glorified homebrew system. You don't have the ability to have the consistency. If you're a great brewer, sure, you can make great beer on your stove, but trying to make great beer on your stove 1,000 gallons a week and have it consistent and have no issues and not get behind, it's just ridiculous. It's not going to happen. So I think actually if I put a slide in here that will kind of talk about what, actually I get that one. So mainly the point here is that you can't use small equipment to make big beer. And so if you're looking to make a large amount of beer and you use a small thing to do that with, you're going to regret it. It absolutely positively will not work. So by August of that year, I ended up with almost nothing there. And so we hired a consultant, tore all that apart, sold all of that equipment, and started over at 15 barrels. My original plan was to start small, and when all the other brewers in that area went out of business, that we would be able to take over and buy some equipment that way. And no one went out of business. Literally, I think 12 of those breweries in 2012 have actually completely closed down. And so there was no equipment for me to buy. So obviously bad plan, add that to the list. So the third mistake that I made was not hiring a brewer. So I was hiring people to make beer instead of investing in a long-term brewing partner. And I think this is a mistake that I see happen consistently and really kind of drives me nuts when I go into a brewery. You see the brewer up there, talk to the brewer, and you can tell they have no idea about the details of beer. Like, why did you pick the mash temp that you picked? I told you, I can't even tell you how many times I've heard the story from a brewer about, you ask me, oh, wow, that's a great recipe. How'd you figure it out? Well, I was looking on the internet and I found blah, blah, blah. Like, at some point, the industry is being run by people who aren't professionals, don't have experience. And what you need to find if you're going to run a successful business is someone who can actually brew beer well and tweak recipes with an actual eye towards a goal instead of just, I think it would be better if we made it with this yeast or slightly drier, or I like this hop better, so blah, blah. There needs to be a business reason for the decisions that you make. So one of the things that I came up with for me is some things that I'm looking for in a brewer. So when I actually hire somebody, I'm actually looking to make sure that, for some reason, it's not loading that. There we go. So for me, it's fairly simple. I'm not looking for someone who can do everything all the time. What I am looking for is someone who appreciates hard work, which seems like it would be obvious. And believe me, the more people that I have met in this industry, the less that is the case. By hard work, I mean actually getting things done without drinking the whole day, and with an eye towards excellence instead of just clicking the box and getting the beer made. How can you make it the best it can possibly be? So someone with a track record of working hard, main difference there is they may work hard today when they're talking to you, but have they worked hard at the other breweries they've been in, the other industries they've worked in? You find a guy who wants to make beer today that used to build picket fences yesterday, that's your guy. Like, that guy works his ass off. Someone who successfully made the beer styles you want them to make. There's so many brewer owners that I've talked to will hire a guy who's made a beer without even tasting that beer. And so how do you know that they're making the style of beer that you want to make? If at the end of the day, they're going to come over to your brewery and tell you that they need to make an Oktoberfest that has Cascade hops in it, fuck that guy. Like, that you should have done a little better research on that one, because that dude's never going to make the great beer that you need him to make. Someone who can actually taste off flavors. I had my third brewer, finally when that one had to end was when I had them taste a batch of our beer that was distinctly off. The ester count just wasn't there. And it was a Hefeweizen, so we just didn't get quite the banana. There was a little bit of a funk in the back end. We were repitching yeast, and this was, I think, 7th generation. And so clearly the yeast had some issues with it. And I asked him to taste it and tell me what was wrong. And he looked at me straight in the face and was like, I don't know. Seems fine to me. He had made that beer for almost 2 years. That you obviously can't, you just can't work with that. You've got to have somebody who can actually kick some ass on it. And he should be the guy telling you, hey, this beer's off. We need to dump it, or it's got a blend, or we've got a problem in our supply line. So obviously that's something we want to look at. Aaron Gore put on here, always call references. And obviously that's true. But at the same time, I have never called a reference where the guy told me the truth. So if the guy you're calling about is an absolute idiot, you're almost never going to get that answer, at least not in Texas. Maybe outside of the Texas, other people don't have that issue, but references around here, we just don't get the numbers that we want. So be cautious with that also. The coworkers is definitely a better way to go. And last one, someone who can go a full day without getting drunk. Honestly, that seems like something that's obvious, but I see that more and more and more, especially guys who are drinking while brewing. If you can do it and not get drunk, fantastic. But if you can't, come on, man. You got to find somebody else. So now the fourth mistake is when I actually got to talk about the vanilla milkshake, hazy, double diabetes stouts, all the bullshit in our industry that I can't fucking stand. And if I'm going to get 28,000 words to write my thoughts and feelings down, I at least get a few to make fun of those beers. So that wasn't the point of that chapter, but I definitely spent some time in there going through that. So brewing what is popular or profitable instead of what is popular is definitely a mistake that I made. I wanted to make cool stuff, unique stuff, but never really sat down and went through the numbers. And so that is one of the reasons I actually did a comparison. And when you look at the different beers, and there's a bunch of ways you go through the whole process, but the simplest place to begin is when you're looking at the different beers that you're going to produce, the cost plus the profit, down to the profit. And so if you can sell the same amount of one beer versus another, but it costs you way less to make one of them, obviously you're going to make money that way, which for me, when I'm facing extinction back in the early 2019, was the number one thing I went back to go look is, why am I doing what I'm doing? Is what I'm doing making me a profit? And so as I did this formula with all of my different beers that I had made, I realized very quickly that I got lucky because the beer that I make that is my kind of flagship that we make the most of is actually simply the most profitable and one of the most profitable beers of any brewery that I've talked to, products that they make. So I got lucky. But for sure, before you decide what to brew, people who are brewing these high ABV triple IPAs and then aren't able to sell it for $20 a 4-pack, they haven't done the numbers on where they need to be and how it's going to actually make money. So for some reason, it doesn't seem to be loading that in. But all right, so those are the two examples that I gave. On mine, it just shows kind of like a Hefeweizen is significantly cheaper than IPA to make. Does not mean that you can sell more Hefeweizen than you can sell IPA, but it's at least something that you should consider when you're going into it. So use a mobile canner. Mistake 5. This is one that I am super happy to say that I did not actually do. The only mistake in the book that I didn't physically make myself. That being said, I tried really hard to make this mistake. I did all the numbers, I wrote artwork, I reached out to the mobile canning guys, and I wanted to actually get them to come into the brewery to do it. Long story short, by the end, I realized that they weren't going to because we did mix culture beer. And at the time, it was only part of our portfolio, but it didn't matter. By having it at all, they wouldn't come. But the idea behind mobile canning, when you run the numbers on the chart that I made, I don't know, can you guys see that? Put it in there, but I can't see it. So I know what it says, but let's see. So basically the concept of mobile canner is obviously what people are doing it for is they want to get their beer out in the market. You're looking for a different stream of revenue. During COVID, we realized that just selling beer over the counter to people in one situation is a recipe for disaster. So we've got to have a multitude of different revenue streams. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with the ability, or you're in a risk situation where you're possibly going to not have somebody able to. I'm sorry, I'm trying to send a thing to get the thing up. Obviously, you guys can't see it. See the chart, but so anyways, in the book, concept is the purpose of the chart is it shows you exactly what all the cost structure is and how much you're actually going to make from a batch of beer that you run through a mobile canner. So ultimately, with the IPA, for example, what I ended up having, when I figured it out, I ended up spending $1,500 roughly to make $98 in profit if I went the whole thing to a mobile canner on a 15-barrel batch, or it was 10-barrel batch, excuse me. And so the idea being that if I'm going to profit $98 and ultimately have to spend $1,500 to get there, if you're selling that to a distributor via a mobile canner, you end up at a position where you're actually having to spend almost $3,000 because of the fact that they don't pay you for anywhere from 10 to 30 days, depending on your contract. Hopefully not 60, unless you have a terrible one. But so ultimately, you're in a situation where you have to spend entirely more money than you're going to make. And so it's not profitable. And the opportunity cost of what you're losing is going to be so high that you're literally going to spin your wheels to the point that you're never going to actually make a profit. So the other side of that coin, if you're able to sell all that shit in your brewery over the counter, face to face with some guy, then you have a chance to actually be able to make more money with it, but it's super small and there's no scalability to that. And so at some point, bad batch, infected cans, whatever, there's a lot of opportunity for you to actually lose a ton of money. So the next one, if you fuck up, don't dump it. This is one of those ones that so many of the breweries that I've seen find ways to make the beer palatable, saleable, however you want to say that, where it kind of just passes quality control to the extent that they're able to get it out. And I was terrible at that. I actually came from a sales background. And so as a salesperson, it wasn't very hard for me to convince myself that what I had made was good. I then obviously convince other people. So what I realized is you've got to go back and set up a kind of a parameters. And so if you're making an IPA, you can be within 5 IBUs if you're high enough, and it's fine. If you're making a 12 Plato beer and it comes in 11.75, you're usually going to be okay. There's definitely variances to that, but you figure out what that is for your beer. You have variances that it can live within, and you have to it down the drain. If it's not, like, you've got to get rid of it. There's an example I use. There's a brewery not far from here. I'm not going to tell you where, but they have a flagship and they did wrapped cans. And so I think they thought that they couldn't re-wrap the cans maybe, but they basically had a mobile canner come in, they filled the cans, tons of them. Like, you'd walk in, it'd be all down the wall of the brewery. And apparently they got some sort of infection. Lucky for them, it wasn't a Brett infection. It had to have been something with bacteria, because it wasn't overcarbed. It just tasted weird and cloyingly sweet, and it was terrible. And so they decided that they were going to leave the sleeves on the cans, still sell them as that beer, but a quote unquote sour version of that beer, which means that they're telling you that they fucked up. They're letting you know that they fucked up, take it home and share with your friends that they fucked up. They're selling you a 6-pack. So there's 6 different times in that interaction you're going to know that they fucked up. It's literally a billboard for mediocrity. And I think it's one of the worst ideas I've ever heard. What's even worse than that is I heard they did it 2 years later again. And so granted, in their defense, they sold it for $1, but what does that say? That, hey, this beer sucks so bad, I'll sell it to you for cheap? It's a really bad way to go about it. So the whole idea of the sour version of the beer that you made because you fucked up and made it sour doesn't work. Don't do that. And I also talked a little bit about in the book about a recall plan. Obviously, you've got to have some sort of plan. There's always a bad keg, always a bit of an overcarb batch. Hopefully, you don't wind up with large batches, but it's happened to me. It'll happen again. And you just got to have the recall plan for how you're going to deal with it with distributors, retailers, consumers. And if you have a batch of beer that the cans or bottles blow up at retail, you better act fast. That can literally be the death of the brewery. I mean, look at there's countless ones. I'm not gonna name names. So there's a lot of breweries that have that happen. So obviously QC, QA are important. If you fuck up, dump it down the drain. So the seventh one was if trust distributors to sell your beer. This is obviously one that's, you in some cases to hit scale, you're gonna have to have a distributor. If you're not distributing outside of your brewery, you're probably gonna be in a little bit of trouble because if literally you've got to have that reach, you've got to have it go, your beer go all over, and so you can't legitimately. There are breweries that do self-distribute statewide, but like in Texas, it's 8 hours to El Paso. It's 3 hours to Houston, 5 hours up to Dallas. You start trying to distribute all over the state, and you can do it, but it's a mess. There we go. So I get this one up. So one of the things that I had a ton of experience with different distributors. I think ultimately I've signed with 16. I've had, I think, 4 go out of business. I had one that just blatantly stole from me. I had another one in San Diego that stopped calling me back in 2018, and I still haven't talked to her. So if you want to call Susie a brown bag beverage, just tell her I said hi. So anyways, distributors can be a huge pain in the ass, but they are absolutely, when it works, it's a great relationship, and you actually absolutely want that to happen. So how do you pick a good distributor? And that's so many different variants of how that works for you. Obviously, everybody's business is different. Ultimately, what I figured out for us is that it was number of brands they represent divided by plus the efficiency, obviously the number of accounts they serve by the number of salespeople. I have seen accounts where there's one on-premise rep for a 2 million person city. I don't know how the hell they thought that was going to work, but ultimately, it's one of those things that you have to find some way to figure out what these guys are doing. And so Headspace is number of brands represented divided by number of salespeople. If a salesperson goes into all these accounts, if one guy for the city of 2 million people can handle one brand, but if you've got 25, you're never going to get mentioned. And so you already run that risk a lot with distributors that just getting mentioned. And I go through like a little more math, which is a little more boring to talk about on a virtual chat. But in the book, it talks all the math about guy goes in, how many times you're gonna get mentioned, how many times you hit that account per month, how much revenue you need per sale, what the possibility of that happening is. And I can just, a little spoiler alert, the math doesn't look good. So it's tough. That's why the big guys have reps in each market. Obviously, we can't afford to typically do that. So one of the reasons that we like to go with some of the smaller distributors that are out there. And I can honestly say that I have some fantastic distributors. And some have been small, some have been big, but it's always a question of how do we fit into this kind of chart? Like, what's the potency of that distributor for our specific brand? And one of the worst mistakes that I can tell you that I've heard people say is if XYZ employee at XYZ distributor is super excited about your brand, so you're going to go with that distributor, that employee will be gone in 3 weeks. It happens every time. And it's happened to me twice, which is 2 times too many. I'm still friends with one of those guys that left, but that sucks. And that distributor ended up going out of business. So obviously there's a problem with finding the right guys. And so the distributor, I'm not going to get on the internet and not tell you what a piece of bloody shit that the Pipeline Craft Distribution team, Jason and Jeff Henches, is in California. They stole roughly $8,000 from us just by not paying us. We shipped them beer. They said they'd pay next day, and it's been years, and now we're never going to get paid. So I'm going to try to get back that $8,000 just in like making fun of them on the internet. So I appreciate you guys letting me do that. So the next thing that I did wrong of the many things is building a small and intimate tap room. I thought that was really cool. So I wanted to have a tap room where people could chat. It's all wood. It's small. It's kind of like some of the best wineries that I've been to. And what you find out is very, very quickly is I use the performance indicator, KPI of profit per seat. And so when we first opened, we had 15 seats. And actually, let me get this out of here too. So we had 15 seats. And so the 15 seats allowed us to generate whatever revenue. And what I found out very quickly is it wasn't near enough. And so I added 15 more seats. And so we had 30 seats. but I had to take some of the production space out to do that. And obviously what ended up happening is that wasn't enough either. And so when you really run the numbers with the amount of square footage that I have here, I'm able to do, which again, it's 1,700 square feet, one of the smallest breweries around, but we have added outdoor seating with cover and all kind of stuff. But with 30 seats, I'm only able to do anywhere from 10 to 15,000 a month, kind of on a good month. And that's with a ton of like outside beer to go, that kind of thing. Like we have an online store, but that's about the max that I can do. And so if you really start running the numbers, many times you're gonna need more than that. The tasting room is a profit center that's going to kind of fill the shortfall of what distribution does or doesn't do. And so what I've gone back now and done is turn it into more of a bar idea. So we actually sell wine by the bottle. That's something you have to consider. Guest taps, I only added one, but I've got a chart that isn't loading on here that talks about like, so when you sell guest beer, that's one of the hardest things for people to do in a small brewery, because basically it feels like you're saying that guy makes better beer than me, and so go buy that beer instead of mine. But what in reality, you can make more money on one of their kegs, even buying it for $150, than many times you can in your own. Just simply because, yes, your margin's way better, but that keg's only got to sell slightly faster than yours to actually be a more profitable idea to sell that beer than your own beer, which sucks to see in writing, but I did it and it is what it is. So we do have a guest tap, works great, allows me to kind of support our local breweries. So I try to keep it guys in the area, and I'll be adding guest taps soon. We do guest beer in package now, and I think there's 20 different options. And I think it represents 20% of our sales with zero marketing. And we still have people come in all the time saying, well, I want to try your beer. And then, we're a specialty brewery. We make all mixed culture beer, aged in barrel, stuff with wine in it, things that the Bud Light drinkers just like, what in the actual fuck is this? And so it helps to go, well, page 2 is all things that beer flavored beer that you might be more into. And so it does actually help us create more revenue. It has added to the revenue line. And I think there's definitely some more opportunity there. We don't have room for food. Obviously, you should consider that. Gluten-free options. When we do the wine, we have 4 different ciders. Oh, there's that. There's the chart. So the chart just kind of shows the 2 different kegs. And if you can buy somebody else's Pilsner for $150, that will sell faster than your beer by a very small margin. You're able to make more money selling their beer than you ever were to sell your own. So that's frustrating again to see, but obviously at the end of the day, the purpose of the tasting room is to make a profit, not necessarily to make sense. So I almost don't want to go to the next one. So the next one is next mistake was give every fuck you have about online beer reviews, which I cannot stand any of the online rating sites. And I never have been able to stand any online rating sites, but one of the things you run up with now with Untapped is that we're in a situation where there is no 14-day waiting period for keyboards. It's a bunch of fucking assholes that are on the internet just being assholes and dropping asshole comments everywhere. So is there something good you can get of it? Sure. But ultimately, the only real value that I see in online beer reviews is just knowing where your beer is being drank and how often. But as far as how they've rated it, I don't think you get anything valuable from there. And in 2017, I had, of course, a mistake book. I had a mistake where I spent a little too much time going down a rabbit hole, arguing with people about why they were wrong about my beer. And I realized very quickly that they weren't wrong. They were coming from their own perspective. And so I made myself these 7 rules so that these are my rules. These are not necessarily your rules, but they may help. These are my rules for how I cannot be an asshole back, basically. And I'll go quickly through them, but you can't change anyone's mind by calling him or her stupid. I've tried, doesn't work. I'll probably do it again tomorrow, but I promise you it doesn't work. It isn't the consumer's responsibility to keep drinking your beer if they didn't like it, even if you improved it, especially if you didn't. Ultimately, that was the entire problem of the post that I went through, was that people were saying, they were talking shit about beer that I had made 3 years ago. Two brewers previous, beer I agree was not well made. I don't think it was good. I'm not proud that we made it, but we made it. It was out there. We had improved the beer, and they weren't giving me an opportunity to showcase that. I get it. And so that's why I'm saying, even if you improved it, that doesn't mean they're going to go back out and buy another 6-pack. You might be able to give them one, which I think is lower down. So we'll get to that. Rule 3, brand perception is reality. The customer's perception is always right. That does not mean correct. It means right to them. And so, again, you can't change their mind simply by arguing with them. So if you can get your beer in their face, great. If not, you're going to have to move on. They'll come back eventually. Maybe they don't, but ultimately there are new people that we can do. So rule number 4, Jeff Young is a little dick. I think we can all agree that that's the truth. Rule 5, always invite someone who isn't satisfied at the brewery to drink for free for him or her, or ship them beer if you can. Legally, we're not supposed to ship beer. And so I'm probably not supposed to tell you on the internet that I have done it and will do it again. But the reality is you have to get your beer to people who had a bad experience. Somehow you've got to replace that. If you were at a restaurant, you give them free dessert. They're sitting there. If someone's at their house and they have your beer and they don't like it because of a legitimate reason, and sometimes illegitimate, there are guys I know that would ship beer to people who just didn't physically like the beer. I have done that before too. I don't necessarily agree quite so much with that one. But if you're building a brand and trying to get kind of goodwill with customers, that's going to go a really long fucking way. So rule 6, if you feel like the need to stick up for your beer in your brewery, do it with one comment and walk away. That one has been the single best kind of like headspace thing for me, this whole process. You have to pay attention to what people are saying, Google reviews, all of it. But if they reply back to you, you're going to go down a rabbit hole of bullshit so deep that you're never going to get out of it. So just say something simple like, hey, we've improved the beer. Hope to see you soon. Log the fuck off. Get away. Don't go back. Because if you go back, you're going to be tempted to say something you probably shouldn't, because you're an artist and what they're talking about is something that you created and that you were proud of and that quite literally might put your kids through college. So you both have a very, very like legitimate argument. And so again, I'm not good at this one, but I have gotten way better. So rule 7, if you can't read the garbage without getting angry, don't read the garbage. If you're not in the headspace to handle it on Sunday afternoon, don't. And don't be at your kid's soccer game and look up Untapped and see what people are saying about it. Let it get you in a bad mood and then you're not paying attention. Not that I've done that one, but don't do that kind of shit. Have a moment that you read the reviews if you want. And again, if you can't handle it, don't. I stopped reading them for the most part. I haven't logged on to Untapped in a month and a half, which tomorrow I'll probably do it. But you know what I mean? I got to get out of that stuff. So then mistake 10, I think this one's one, it's hard. I played back and forth with different graphics, but this one's hard to talk about in this kind of environment without going into detail with math and like all this. So, but basically it was, don't figure out how to manage cash flow. We came from an industry where cash flow was different. It was fitness based. And so we had memberships. And so 30 days out, we knew what our revenue was going to be. So what I've had to do now is go back and I simplified the whole thing for me, where I've got today money, tomorrow money, and operational float. Those 3 things are really the main things that kind of run my business, where I try not to buy supplies more than 30 days at a time. You can do that as a brewery, and many of them do. A lot of times people will be buying 6 months worth of grains, or 3 if they're smart, because you can go much longer than that. Or hops. Obviously, you can do that on contract and take those in as you want. But even bottles, cans, I've seen guys that are buying a container of cans at a time, which is like a 6-month supply. You can absolutely do that, but you have to have the discipline to be able to budget that per month and still be putting 1/6 of that price away in an accrual account, so that when you run out of those 6 months of cans, that you aren't scrambling to find the money to pay for them. And so the cash flow side of it is simple, but it gets complex in this industry. I think there are probably guys who can do a better job, maybe even in this conference, of explaining how to manage that cash flow. But I do give some pretty important, I think, points in a book about basically not overextending yourself and understanding how your cash flow works. Because one of the biggest problems that I ran into was, for one, terms. Like if you run up terms on bottles, that's great. You don't have to pay it for 30 days. But then when your distributor pays 15 days late, what's your plan for paying that? And if you're not doing that and you end up having to use today's money to buy the bottles and then use today's money to buy the next round of bottles because you didn't get the money from the distributor back in, you can go deeply into debt on supplies and inputs. And by doing that, you wind up in a situation like I was in 2019, where revenue dipped to like 14,000 for the month. I'm like, what the fuck am I going to do? And the only way to fix that is to get more investor money. Typically at that point, a bank's not going to loan you money. So you have to be very, very careful about how you're managing the ebbs and flows of your cash. And one way to do that is also with your product lines. And so deciding that I'm going to do X amount of beer in kegs, X amount of beer in cans, slims even versus half barrels. And so, because there's different price points on all of those, different profit levels on all of those, and different payouts on all of those. So if you've got a distributor that pays net 0, net 10, net 20, balancing those distributors so that you get, if you do an entire batch that's worth $10,000, if you sell all of that to your 30-day distributor, then you have no cash flow for 30 days. If you can piecemeal that out where you sell a percentage of it to a cash guy, or then obviously your tasting room cash guy, a 10-day, a 15-day, and don't ever sell them in the pipeline because that's a 0-day. They'll never fucking pay you. That was 2. So by doing that, you can actually kind of stagger your payments to come in so that you've got a little bit more cash flow throughout the month to pay the rent, to pay the light bill. It will help you tremendously to have a plan for how that money is coming back, because otherwise it won't, and it all continues to go back out. So figure out how to manage cash flow, today money, tomorrow money, operational float. Obviously big part of what I did incorrectly. And so please learn from my mistakes, which ultimately was the point of the book. I said in the beginning, if you didn't hear, that the entire concept of what I wrote was a book about what I did wrong. They're all situational. They're all based on the distributor that I had, the temperature in Texas, the markets that I was in Louisiana, Indiana, San Diego. So they're going to be different. You're going to be in different markets. You're going to have a different product line. You're going to hopefully be smarter than I was. But at the same time, what I wrote down was a bunch of kind of examples of things that could go wrong, and that you should at least make sure you don't make the same mistakes that I did. Hopefully you can make new mistakes that are maybe less costly and move forward. But ultimately, that the whole idea is that you make the industry better. And I hope that I can at least give you enough information to get to that point. So I'm not sure exactly how much time I have left. It looks like maybe like 3 minutes, which is less than I had planned for questions. But does anybody have any specific questions that maybe I can answer on the comments? Let's see. Kayla, you have someone that you can give it to at least, so that's great. So I guess if there's no other questions, and I think I kind of hit all the high points. I didn't really miss anything that I think that should have been in there. But again, I did leave and I'll type it in here again, but I left my thing in the top of what my phone number, email is. Feel free to reach out if you want any of the slides. I'd definitely send those to you as well via email, or I should be able to text them actually too. But I'm just a guy who made some mistakes and hopefully learned from them. So yeah, so there you go. I do think that if you get the opportunity to spend some more time, that one of the main things you should really consider is that distribution piece. So I even go through in there how to deal with the kind of the self-distribution model, and at what point the self-distribution model breaks down where you kind of need to hire a professional distributor. Obviously, what questions to ask when you're interviewing those guys, what to look for, what to run screaming from with your hair on fire, that kind of thing. So All the mistakes I think are important to look at, but I think that's one of those ones that can make or break a company. And unfortunately, I've seen it break it way too many times, picking the wrong distributor. All right, so I'm going to wrap up. Again, I appreciate everybody coming, and hopefully we'll see you guys out there making beer.